Get started with the Devar Torah. And every one of you has on the table over here these cards. I just want to read a piece of Gemara and a letter of the Rebbe. The Rebbe letter. Somebody wrote to the Rebbe advice. Again, this is particular advice to an individual, so you take your personal inspiration from it, but not necessarily a Hira l'Rabim. So the Rebbe says, it's my hope, I'm just going to do the English. As I told you when you visited me, that by growing the vessels of your parnasa, your factory, the Rebbe was telling this individual that they should expand their factory. When you do that, you will also grow the blessings that Hashem can flow through your receptacles. So in other words, if you want Hashem's brachas to come to you, you got to make big kalim. You got to open, if you want success, you got to think big. But this is so long as you also grow the channels that connect the source of the blessings with the vessels below, meaning the performance of the mitzvahs of Hashem. But then, once you make the big keli, the channels are the mitzvahs, you keep the mitzvahs, and then those channels will lead the brachas straight into the keli you make. So hopefully all of you tonight will walk away to learn how to grow your kelim, and at the same time to grow the channels, to allow the brachas to flow into the kelim that you'll make. I'm very excited. We're going to be calling up our keynote speaker. Just a quick word of introduction. This was the longest part of getting tonight's event going. There's many talented people here that are going to be sharing at the tables. There's Baruch Hashem, that wasn't the hardest thing, to get people to come and share at the table. But to get someone to stand up here and to speak a keynote speech, that was a logistical challenge, and I had to dig into the network, and I reached out to Reb Shmuel Genevish, who's an advisor to CHYE, and I said to him, who is somebody who could speak about e-commerce comfortably from the podium, and he has experience and knowledge that he could share. And without batting an eye, Shmuel said to me, you have to get Eli Katz. So Eli Katz is going to be speaking to us. Eli started in e-commerce at the genesis of e-commerce. He'll share his story, but he already started in 1995. He worked with 3 companies and he grew them to very coveted positions on the IR, top companies on the e-commerce exchange. Today, he runs the EMOB, which is an e-commerce association, and he has the benefit of watching the companies and seeing the trends. And actually, when he runs his table, he's going to share insights into the trends in e-commerce. So without further ado, I welcome Eli Katz.
Before I begin, just out of curiosity, how many people here are already selling online? If you can raise your hands if you have an online business. 15%. If you're not doing anything online, raise your hand. There's a lot of undecided here in between. Okay. It's interesting, when I got the phone call from Yeshua and from Shmuley about speaking, I was thinking about it, and I was reminded of a story I read in the paper about this homeless guy in Las Vegas who won $2 million in a slot machine. Turns out downtown Vegas, I guess the public facilities, you need to put a quarter in to unlock the door. He didn't have any money, so he was panhandling, and a guy gave him a quarter. So he's about to go to the bathroom, and as he wants to enter, somebody is leaving, and he holds the door open for him. So he saved the quarter. Now he has a quarter, he comes out, he goes across the street into the casino, puts it into a slot machine, makes $2 million. So the reporter who's interviewing, because this is a great story, right? The reporter who's interviewing him says, would you like to say a thank you to the man who gave you the quarter, who enabled you to make you a millionaire? And he said, no, I would really like to say thank you to the man who held the door open for me, because that was the instrumental part. So Shmuley is one of the people in my life. Many people have held the door open for me at different points in time, and Shmuley was one of those. And therefore, I like to help do that for other people and hold the door open, so I'm here. I will tell you how I got into e-commerce, and then try not to bore you with too many details or too many technicalities, and then leave you with what I consider today's 7 principles that you should think about or try to have answers to as you embark on your e-commerce business, or truth is any venture. In 1995, I was a young man, I was 24 years old, and I was working for a company, it was a public company that was selling perfume, health and beauty aids. It was a $500 million company. And I'd always been a little closet geek playing with computers, and online didn't exist the way it does today. And we were a wholesale business. We would sell to Walmart, we would sell to drugstores, and I thought maybe if we could sell our perfume online, we'd make more margin, it would be interesting, it wouldn't be so boring as calling drugstores and trying to get them to buy another bottle of Ralph Lauren or some other fragrance. So there were 3 companies at the time who kind of owned, the internet was a closed space. It was not an open internet. You had to access through one of the primary points. There were 3 big companies who had those dial-up access points. Only one of them is around today. The largest one was a company called CompuServe. CompuServe was owned by H&R Block. The second largest company, anybody remember these companies that have been around? There's a few gray hairs, I see people my age. The second was Prodigy, which was a joint venture between Sears and IBM. The third and the smallest company was called America Online, AOL. Now, I started calling all of them. At the time, AOL was a smaller company than the company I worked for. And I finally, after badgering them, the only ones who called me back were AOL. And they said, okay, we'll let you have a store in our marketplace. You just pay us a revenue share. 12.5% of every dollar goes to us. No upfront fees. You just have to build your side of your store. Okay. That was the easy part. Now I had to go and convince my bosses and explain to them what this thing was and to get them to buy off on it. So another man who held the door open for me was the CEO of the company, Herman Jacobs, who said, okay, Ellie, how much money is it going to cost? I really didn't know. I had no idea. I told him $5,000. That seemed appropriate at the time. And he said, okay, but make sure not to neglect your primary job. This is a nice side project. Then I had to go to the CFO, who really forget about online or internet. He didn't know what a computer was. He didn't have a computer in his office. And he told me, I mean, he had to approve it because the CEO said, you have the budget. But he told me, look, I don't know how you're planning on selling perfumes on this computer thing, but if you sell 1 bottle the first week, you're successful. And it can't be to any one of your relatives. He knew that I had 200 first cousins, and he wasn't falling for that. So finally, we prepared. It was September. I remember September 12th, 1995. It was a Tuesday evening. We launched our site. 2 weeks actually before Amazon launched their store, believe it or not. If I was really smart, I would have sold books, not perfumes. And back then, we used to have to wait for the order files to come through. It wasn't instant. I didn't sleep much that night. And I came into the office bright and early the next morning, and the file is there, and there are 26 orders. 25, considering one of them was a relative, but okay. So it was great. You know, we were so happy, we actually didn't think about everything that comes after the part when you get the order, like fulfilling it, getting paid, and you know, all the good stuff. By the end of the week, we had over 500 orders. And then I got a call from the warehouse saying, you know, we can't ship these because there's no payment against them. Like, what are you talking about? These are consumers. They gave us their credit card numbers, and we're good to go. Yeah, but we don't have a merchant account. We can't process credit cards. If you recall, the CFO wasn't really expecting any orders, so he never bothered to get a merchant account. So from the beginning, and we built that company, and we'll get back into some of the stories and things that we've learned along the way. To ultimately, 4 years later, we were doing about $3 million in revenue, and we'd raised 2 rounds of capital and ultimately sold that business in a transaction that was about $50 million at the time. Later on, so I went from selling toiletries to selling toilets, because I couldn't find something more challenging than, once you've mastered selling perfume online, to selling a product like toilets and bathtubs, which need to be shipped, are difficult. But it turns out that difficult categories or specialized categories are actually better to sell online than simple categories, because it creates a higher barrier to entry for your competitors. It's once you have it figured out that everybody else finds it easy as well, and then it becomes hard for you. And from there, I ended up working with a group. We acquired a brand called Ashford, which had actually been my customer back in the iBeauty days, in the perfume business. They used to buy the gray goods from us because they couldn't buy it direct. They went public, raised $200 million. I believe one day they had a $1 billion market cap. Fast forward 7 years later, 6 years later, we ended up buying what was left, the assets, the customer list, for less than $500,000. And I learned a very interesting lesson about the value of a brand, or particularly a brand on the internet, and the value of a customer, which I'll elaborate on shortly. One of the things I learned in iBeauty, when we went out to raise financing, so overcoming if I look at the presentations now, many years later, the first third of our deck, or our presentation, explained the internet. There was this medium, how fast it was growing, how it was going to overtake TV, cable, radio, etc. The second third explained how it is you can actually sell a bottle of perfume on the internet and why it makes economic sense. Then the third part spoke about our business. One of the challenges that I would get all the time from investors was, hey, what's this market? How much can you sell online? Is there any research? Is there any statistics? Now, obviously there aren't any, because nobody else is really doing this. So I had to go out and get a third party to make the research, but they don't know anything. How are they going to do the research? So I learned another little thing about the way the world works. So I went to the top research firm who was doing all these studies and all these research reports, and I said, look, I need a report that estimates the potential and the size of the market for selling fragrances and cosmetics online. And they said, no problem, it'll be $15,000. Okay. Then I sat down with them for a week and explained to them what I think the market is going to be. And then they gave me this whole thick loose leaf, which took my yeshivish vocabulary and built into this really nice big report with a lot of fancy words, but my numbers. They said, you know, we were really fascinated by this. If you allow us to publish the summary results of this report, we'll knock $5,000 off the price. And I was really excited. That's great. Aside from saving the money, this established the credibility because it was an outside source publishing this number. I knew that we had kind of created the reality when one day somebody is showing me one of our competitors' pitch decks, and I see the numbers. They're quoted, our official numbers of what the market size were. They are being used as the de facto market statistics, right? It's the story with the Baal Shem Tov. When you hear your own story being told back to you, you know you've reached full circle, right? That becomes a de facto. The other thing that I've learned, and I think is a very, very crucial principle in doing business online, is that it is better to ask forgiveness than permission. The status quo, or the established companies, vendors, manufacturers, do not like to rock the boat. And when you want to come and try something new, and I've seen this many times, the first answer, the knee-jerk response is no. By the time they get around to yes, it's too late and the ship has sailed. If you're successful, then they need to contend with you. And then your past transgressions generally will be forgiven. If you're not successful, it really doesn't matter anyhow. And time again, early on in 1997, I made a deal with America Online. I signed a 4-year contract that gave us the exclusivity. We were, for 4 years, going to be the only people allowed to sell perfume and cosmetics on their network. It is the equivalent of doing that today with Google at the time. Now, they thought these guys from Brooklyn are nuts because nobody else would pay this amount. And they had no one else to bid us against, so they accepted it. With that contract in hand, I started approaching the manufacturers who would never want to sell to me, and explain to them, this is the online world. I have these exclusive contracts. They had no idea what the online world was, so I was talking to the wall. So I said, picture this. New York City is serviced by 5 airports. 3 major airports, Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia, 2 private airports, Teterboro and White Plains. Imagine if I owned 4 out of those 5 airports. Chances are, if you want to fly in and out, I control that flight. That is the online world. If you want to sell your products in those categories, you got to talk to me. And I started signing up the manufacturers. Now, here's where another principle that I'll share with you that I find is very important to have what I call a twofer or a threefer. 2 for 1, 3 for 1. So I have an exclusive contract I'm paying a lot of money for. Hopefully I'm selling more because of that exclusivity. But the market may not be big enough. But because I have this exclusivity, now I have the manufacturers and the vendors who need to sell to me at a price that I could never get before. And now I have another potential supply, which I can then further sell into the gray market. So I'm making money on both sides of that transaction. So that is my 2 for 1, or the twofer. It extends more. I'm not going to elaborate because we can spend all day on that, and it's a little more complex. Now, I'm going to give you a quick, I've shared a couple of principles with you, but I'll give you a quick overview or summary of the key takeaways, or the 7 principles that I found to be very important, for me at least anyhow, in being effective in online retail. Today, more and more, I think it's very important to have a niche. You need to be a specialist. Companies like Amazon that sell everything and do it very, very well, you can't compete with them head on. They just own too much of it. Maybe one day the government will deregulate and break them up into baby Amazons, who knows. Right now, when you need to pay the rent or the mortgage every month, being a specialist and having a niche market is where most people are successful. Even more importantly, if you can be what we call completely vertically integrated. So if you own the manufacturing, you have a unique product, and the retail from beginning to end, you own the brand, you're in a stronger position. Be an extremist. You need to pick, there are three primary areas that a company needs to choose from. Price, service, or selection. You cannot be a fanatic in all three. You cannot have really cheap prices, great service, and an amazing selection. You can maybe succeed at two of the three, but you can do really well. Take one of the three and do not let anybody beat you at that component. You need to be a fanatic. You need to be an extremist in that area. If you're going to be price, operate cutthroat, operate low cost, low overhead, and do it on price. If you're going to excel at service, you'll have the margin, but then you need to take it over the top in service. You want to do selection? Again, there are companies, for example, there's a company called Replacements.com. All they do is they sell, you have an old set of dishes that they stopped manufacturing, and you've got like everything except the main plates, and like you only have 3 left. How do you replace that? You got it for your wedding gift, and there's, well, guess what? They have patterns of a huge warehouse, and every single pattern going back 100 years, and they carry all these little one-off items. That is a specialty business, and selection is their focus. You're not going to get a good price because you are desperate to replace those dishes. But you're going to get the selection. Long tail is what we call it in online retail, is a very, very effective way to compete. Figure out in every strategic move that you do, what's your 2 for, what's your 3 for? If you do this, if you invest in this, what is your 2 for 1, your 3 for 1? Try to maximize your resources. Resources are not just money. One of the most misleading words in online is when the company comes and tells you, we'll give it to you for free. Services are not free. It's your investment of time and energy. And you will discover that you just cannot do everything, and you need to pick those battles. So find which ones give you the most bang for your buck, go with those. I think one of the misleading, or what I found a very dangerous area in online, and it's become more so, is what I call customer acquisition versus customer rental. Customer acquisition is what it costs you to acquire a customer. How much do you need to spend to get that customer into your store? So if you're selling something for $100 and you have a $50 gross profit, and you take away other expenses for credit cards, etc. I'm simplifying this, and you're left with $30. So everything between $30 and what you spent on advertising is your net profit. That means if you spend more than $30 on acquiring that customer, you're losing money in every transaction. Now, sometimes you're selling a product where a customer signs up and it's a subscription, or they will remain a customer for a long time. So you've acquired that customer. So you may not make money on the first transaction, but that customer is constantly there. Unfortunately, today, a lot of businesses find that we are only renting the customer. That means every single time they come back, we just paid for another click to Google. Amazon is a great example of a business that only rents you the customer each time. So it's one of those, I don't want to get into the analytics and whatnot, but it's one of those things that you need to think about and measure your true customer acquisition cost. Another important thing is so principle number 6. One of the things I'll add about customer acquisition, companies tend to overvalue how enduring or how strong of a brand they have. Right? got a lot of customers because they sold cheap, not realizing that those customers, if you're not cheap, those customers will not buy again. I've seen this when we acquired Ashford. I've seen this with many companies, most notably recently, if you're familiar with Fab.com, which was started out as a sales site, and then they decided to become more of a full price and design and a little fancier, and suddenly their revenue, their sales plummeted from $250 million literally down to $20 million. And this was already, the Mavina, these were the people who knew what they were doing, and with big funding, it just, when you build your business, your brand on discounting, that's where it remains. Principle number 6 is the over-reliance on one channel. Never allow more than 1/3 of your revenue to come from one platform or channel. So for example, if you're selling on Amazon or eBay, make sure you have other channels where you're getting revenue from. Or if you're getting a lot of your revenue from pay-per-click or organic search, all of those platforms, all of those channels, I've seen it time and time again, where overnight Amazon decides that they have a different strategic interest. To paraphrase Henry Kissinger, companies don't have permanent friends or enemies. They just have interests. Amazon's interests today are one way, tomorrow they're another, and you are insignificant. No matter how important you think you are to any one channel or to any one marketplace, you are not. Lahavdil, to go to the other side and quote this Gemara in Baba Basra from Rabbi Bar Chana. Is a story that they were traveling on a ship in the middle of the ocean, and they came upon an island that was really a very large fish, and they had vegetation had grown on the back of the fish. So they got off, they didn't know, they thought it was an island, and they got off the boat and they started cooking lunch. They made a fire. The fish got hot from the fire on its back, so decided to take a dive into the ocean. He says, not for the fact that we were close to the ship, we all would have drowned. What appears to you to be a very solid relationship, or to be terra firma, is an illusion, because Amazon is a big fish, even though it's really a big river, but okay, the metaphor works. And when it gets hot for them, they dive under the water. It doesn't make a difference where you are. In many categories where they decide to buy direct and then have a deal with the manufacturer, they will turn you off with zero warning. Or if you, I remember I had this with Google once. One day I come into work, our Google AdWords account is shut down. Why? It was a Kafka, we can't tell you. Because you finally gets escalated because you have somebody complained that you were selling counterfeit goods. I'm like, who? What? We can't tell you. And by the time you get to the point where you're down 5 days and a good deal of your revenue is dependent on Google AdWords, and suddenly you just took a hit of $100,000 and maybe you got it resolved. So not being overly dependent, I think, is a very crucial thing to understand. And point number 7, what I call the short blanket. People think that they're always looking for the next technology that will solve all of their problems. Just remember, technology is like a blanket that's a drop too short. It will either cover your nose or your toes, but something is going to stick out at night. May solve one problem, will create other problems. So it's not just decide what you're comfortable in sticking out at night and what you don't need answered. I'll give you a bonus, an 8th principle, which is, I'm not always 100% correct. So if one of the principles is not working for you, one of the things you need to like I said earlier, it is better to ask forgiveness than permission. So it's about breaking the rules and finding your way in your niche that work in e-commerce. So with that, I will leave you, and I'm sure I hope you have more questions than answers, because this is always an ongoing process. And I learn every day from people who have a lot less experience than I do. I still learn new things. So hopefully get a chance to talk to you all and learn something new today. Thank you very much.